Well, welcome to the Beyond Sunday podcast, where faith comes alive beyond the church walls. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Stephanie Moorhand, and today we're diving into one of my favorite topics, reimagining evangelism, with someone who embodies hope, creativity, and mission in everything that he does. My guest today is the Reverend Ryan Hebel. Did I say that right, Ryan?
Close. Hebel.
Thank you. Hebel. I just did that just to make us all laugh. Hebel, an ordained deacon, go deacon power, who serves as West County campus pastor at the Gathering in St. Louis for 13 years. First as a worship pastor and as an executive director of Beyond a Network. He will speak to all that good stuff in the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church. Graduated from the Fuller Theological Seminary. Ryan presently serves as a church planter, site pastor of the Gathering's new West County site, which will launch fully in 2026. He's not busy at all, y'all, not busy at all. He describes himself as hopelessly hopeful, and you'll hear why. That's not just a catchphrase, but a way of life and ministry. Today, we're going to talk about how evangelism can move from the shadows to something that's just mentioned towards a grace-filled lifestyle of church, how ordinary people can be evangelistic in everyday life, and why collaboration across churches, communities, civic organizations, communities that are essential for reaching the world with redeeming power of God, showing love, hope, and at the end of the day, transformation. Well, that was long, but I needed to tell the listening public about your background because you are an amazing human being. And I will not fail to mention that you're on my board of directors as the conference evangelist for Western North Carolina Conference. Welcome, my brother, for Beyond Sunday podcast. Hope you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks. It's good to be with you.
Oh man, listen, let's just jump right on in.
Let's go.
We're going to start. I want you to tell us about your family first, and then I want you to answer that question. What does hopelessly hopeful mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could talk about my family all day, especially we just got back from family vacation out on the West Coast, visiting friends and family out that direction in Colorado and California, and it was awesome. I'm a dad. I'm married. That came first, and then I'm a dad of 4, 2 biological kids, 2 adopted kids. We're a multiracial family, and I love being a dad. It's such a part of who I am, just as a person, as a pastor, and in really what I see as my work to create a church that my kids are going to be able to be a part of when they grow up. So that's really important to me, both professionally and personally. And it's a big part of my life. It keeps me running around to a lot of baseball and soccer games and swim meets and gymnastics and all the things. So it's really fun.
You're not busy at all. You're not busy at all.
No, not at all. And especially this time of year, our kids, we go back to school on Monday, so it's back to school. And, I'm looking forward to that routine a little bit. Summer's great, but it's time to get us a little bit organized in our lives. So I think they're ready and I'm ready. In talking about hope and being hopelessly hopeful, that really undergirds how I feel about just life and ministry in general. Some of it comes from a place of understanding that, we don't have control over everything that happens. We do have a choice in how we approach and how we trust and how we hope. I really think hope is at the core of what it means to be someone who's committed to following Christ, because that's what Christ leaves us with is hope for what's to come, right? A roadmap to get there, a Jesus to follow, but also a promise. And you can't be committed to and following a promise unless you have hope. And I think that's really what it is. Like for me, if that starts to fade or dim, either in any work that I'm doing, then that's when I start to lose a little bit of my fire, my passion for what I'm doing. So I think that hopelessly hopeful idea really drives the whole thing. I think it's who we need to be as leaders and pastors in the church. I think it's who we need to be as a church. Really a beacon of hope that never gives up, because we have an eternal promise. We don't run in cycles like the political world in the same way. We don't have any of that. So sometimes I think we put ourselves in these boxes when it comes to our hope. We let our hope get limited by the confines of the other things that we encounter in the world. And that's a trap for us when really we have the opportunity to embrace a hope that's infinite, that works outside the confines of everything else that we encounter. And I think we sell that short sometimes. So I just try to keep that front and center around who I am and the work that I do with that phrase. It helps me to center each day when I wake up.
I love it. I love it. And guess what? At the end of the day, as those who are believers, as Christians, that is our everyday values, getting up to say, hey, we got to stay in the center of what the main thing is. And so I'm glad that I dug that up on you.
Yeah, me too.
um, so Ryan, tell us, just from the work that you're doing, the new church plant that you're leading, the 13 years at your faith community.
Mm-hmm.
I just got to go back. When did you discover that God was calling you in this direction? And I
Oh
will say
yeah.
the core of what you do is evangelistic. And why this?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's several things for me. I think my call story I know started. The call started when I was a kid. I didn't know what it was at first, and then and really it came from a place of a church that embraced me in a big way. I had a real positive experience of church as a kid. And it was an experience related to what could have been a hard situation. I had a single mom, growing up when I was young, and the church was a real place of embrace and safety for us, and a place that really taught me who Jesus was and what the church could be at its best, which was awesome. So that was my experience growing up, and that really rooted me in. I think a full understanding of what the church can be when it's good and healthy, when it's doing its job.
Mm.
Um, I talk to a lot of people that have church trauma, and that's real and that's legitimate. But I didn't have a lot of that as a kid. That church was a positive experience for me, and so I think I bring that to the table in a lot of ways because I've seen and experienced, been formed by what could be. I know what's possible. So that adds to that hopefulness that I have of who we can be as we continue forward in the church. So I think from my perspective, um, you know, the church is um, the church is a place that can bring to the table um, a different way of life for
Mm.
folks.
Mm.
And it's an alternative lifestyle. And I think the church can fall in the trap sometimes of being, there are dangers to it, right? The church can, in corners of the church has like this persecution complex or separates itself from the world. But I think the subculture of the church that's really beautiful is offering an alternative to the challenges that we face each and every day. So I think, like, just in general, my calls continued to bloom out of that and sort of developed into a passion for people that weren't church people, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So over time, I'd spend a lot of time with and around church people, but the more I do, the more squirmy I get. So, I bumped into these things in my life as time goes on where I realized, okay, I need to be around people who aren't church people for a bit, because that's what Jesus preferred. And that tends to be what I prefer. Jesus was always coming over for dinner at someone's house who was not a church person and inviting himself. So that's kind of what I enjoy as far as life goes. For a long time, that played out for me through worship, through music and the arts.
Mm.
That's my undergraduate work was in music and the performing arts. So I spent a lot of time really with music and worship music in particular as the front end of that invitation. And that has a lot of value, I think, because people experience God through music in a way that's unique that they don't through just words. Really, it's an emotional spiritual delivery system, I think, for theology and for words.
Mm-hmm.
That just has a depth and a power that we don't necessarily find in other places in the world. Music unites people. So that was a vehicle. But I think what's important to note for that, for me at least, is that it was always a means to an end. So I've spent a lot of time in a music and worship facing role prior to my current role. Um, but it was always the means to help new people to meet and encounter Christ. And I think that's part of why, as I landed at the gathering, at least initially, and have been here so long, is because the gathering does a great job really keeping reaching new folks front and center. We're really laser focused on new people and new generations. That's who we've always been. That's who we continue to be. And we just keep that right out in front, like our little carrot on a stick that we're always following in the work that we do here. So my call continued to bloom out of that. And really, my call as a deacon as well, when I stepped into ordained ministry, that was the work that I was really interested in, was connecting that idea of connecting the church with the rest of the world and being a bridge between the two. That was the most appealing thing to me. That was the heart and the center of my call, was the people that aren't at church yet, and
Mm-hmm.
getting them connected to the church, and then helping them to discover and recognize that they can then turn around and do the same thing for their friends, for their neighbors, that it is a repetitive cycle that we
Mm-hmm.
can reproduce in one another. That's what we see in scripture, and that's what we should be seeing today. So then I think the Beyond Network sort of bloomed out of that. It was an idea coming out of the pandemic, recognizing that a lot of times in our context here at the gathering, it could feel a little lonely,
Mm.
because we try to hold a couple things that a lot of churches will try to tell you are one or the other, right? And we see them as both and. So we try to be a church that is both radically invitational and radically inclusive, both at the same time. So we want to be a place for everyone, but we also want to be a place that's constantly inviting everyone to meet, connect with, and grow with Jesus and one another. And it seems weird that those things would not be together a lot in the church, but what we found, at least in our community here in St. Louis, is that was a little bit unique. We're like, why do we feel like we're the only church in this space that's radically inclusive? For example, like affirming of the LGBT community, racially diverse, but at the same time, sort of evangelical in the way that we approach ministry and invite people to come with passion. So I went on the hunt for other folks who sort of existed in that sphere. I thought first I need to figure out, are there other people like this? Surely there are. How do I find them? And then how do I use what the gathering is to be sort of a connective tissue or a resource to help them discover one another, connect with each other, learn from one another. So that's what Beyond came from, both just the conference and the network idea, is that we don't really see ourselves through Beyond as like a top-down purveyor of resources in a way. Here's what we do, just copy and paste what we do. We really see ourselves as a vehicle and a means to help people connect and learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about the connection a lot in Methodist world, but we're not always that connected outside of sort of our official polity and programs. Um, and so because of that, we need new vehicles. And so Beyond has been a really cool way to say, okay, here's this church in California that's really good at this thing. And here's this church in Virginia who wants to be good at this thing, but is not.
Mm-hmm.
How can I use Beyond to help them discover that each other exists and then connect to each other to both learn and grow together? And then, they don't really need us anymore after that. It just becomes the means through which people encounter each other and grow.
So
Right.
tell me the characteristics of your church, and how did y'all get there? And what does it mean from your perspective to be
Yes.
evangelistic?
Yeah, absolutely. I always recognize I take this all the way back to, I went to Fuller. You mentioned that earlier, and Fuller's interesting because its original name was Fuller Evangelical Seminary. Now it's Fuller Theological Seminary. And so Fuller is a multi-denominational seminary. It really came out of the evangelical movement out in LA. And I think even the Pentecostal folks, the Azusa Street revivals and all of that. And so that's their background and heritage in many ways. But what's interesting is, when I was studying there, at least, they were really wrestling with a shifting narrative around what it means to be an evangelical. Professors who had been there around a long time, administrators, they were just torn up around the idea of what the word evangelical was becoming in the broader narrative. There was this like grip on, okay, I keep hearing evangelical in this context as a voting block, or basically
Yes. Yes.
that I don't resonate with really anymore. But evangelical really means this: like we are supposed to be the ones embodying what it means to be an evangelical, and my narrative, at least then, was like, sorry, you just got to let that go, because you're not going to be, at least right now, you're not going to be able to get that back in words. You're going to have to do it with how you live. You can't do it from an institutional perspective. You're going to just have to be it and live it and do it. Because the best words, like when you think about things like evangelical or even words like Methodist, they came later. They were other people's attempt to describe what they were seeing happening in people's lives and in the world.
Methodology.
Yes, absolutely. It was a methodology. It was an approach to life, and there was evidence of it. Like people were seeing it lived out, and then they tried to slap a name on it, and that's where we get these words. And so I think when we try to approach these things, whether it's Methodism, evangelicalism, from a institutional perspective, which is primarily how we're built now. That's our delivery system. That's what we're familiar with. That's when we fall short. It's because we put it in a box that made sense for a certain time and context and place. And largely, someone has torn open that box, and people are freaking out a little bit. And so I think what's important to me is trying to understand what evangelical or evangelism means in the best sense of the word, and returning to that through the life that we live. And for me, a lot of times, what that means is from a perspective of invitation, because that's what I see Jesus do. Evangelism, in a harder sense, tends to be understood by a lot of folks, if they're not as familiar, as something, be forcing someone on something on someone. Here's this thing I believe. You better believe it, or you're going to hell. Yeah, lake of fire for you, right? And that's not good news. That's a threat. And nobody's really interested in that, I think. And so I think reframing it once again as, okay, we have this good news. Jesus is the hope of the world. So how do I deliver this good news through invitation? So at the gathering, we use a lot of times we use evangelical and invitational sort of interchangeably, because people understand an invitation. They want to be invited to a thing that's compelling. So if there's something great, they want to go, but they won't unless somebody invites them. And what we found is, you tend to hedge as a church person, like, oh, I don't want to invite people to church, even though it's totally transformed my life. I don't want to impose that on anyone. But what we find is, you'd run into people who would be a part of your life, recognize that you went to church, that things were different for you, and want to be a part of it. And you'd have conversations like, hey, people would say, hey, can I come to your church? And you'd be like, oh, of course. Yeah, why would you think you couldn't come to my church? And the reply would come, oh, well, you never invited me. So I just thought, it was only for, Methodists or whatever, a certain type of people. And so we started to recognize these patterns, going, oh, you just have to invite folks and they'll come. And have an encounter that can reshape their life forever, and receive the good news, and be transformed, and then join you in that same invitation, which is really cool. So that's how the gathering sort of emerged. It came from invitation, with the gathering being, gosh, now we're 20 years old as a church, but a new church start was totally dependent on invitation and inviting new folks to a new thing. And just embedding that as a core part of who we are. So I really see evangelism as embedded with invitation, because that's what we see Jesus do. Jesus wasn't meeting people. Sure, Jesus was teaching, but Jesus wouldn't meet people and then be like, sit down, I'm going to lecture you every time. Sometimes it was, hey, nice to meet you, person on the margins. I'm going to invite myself over for dinner at your house. and then we'll talk.
Mhm.
It was an invitation to be a part of something at a different way on a really human level. So that's where I think evangelism really thrives, is in our daily lives through invitations to things that people want to be a part of that we're already doing.
So does evangelism only occur when someone that you meet outside the walls of the church or beyond the walls of the church to come to the building, or is there other
Yeah.
pathways of
Yeah, great
evangelism?
question.
Yeah.
Great question. Absolutely, it's bigger than just the building. 100%. And so, for me, for a lot of my invitation early on was to worship because I was the worship pastor. And
Mhm.
as I said before, that was the vehicle or the delivery system for me. Because I knew that if people would just come, they'd have a good experience. I knew it was a good worship environment. They were going to encounter something special and important and transformative there. But what we've come to recognize is that it's so much broader than that,
Mhm.
um, especially after the pandemic, because people don't regularly go to things in the same way. There's a lot more hesitation to say yes to those types of invitations. But what's really cool, I'll use an example, is we launched a wellness program at the gathering. And it's just wellness groups. It's a version of small groups, but the
Mhm.
front end is people meeting together around challenging things in their lives. We
Mhm.
recognize, okay, somebody might not want to walk into a room full of hundreds of people for worship that they've never met, especially if they're not a church person. That's just it's kind of weird and hard to do. But someone might be struggling with grief
Mhm.
or addiction or another kind of loss or challenging family relationships around the holidays. All of these things that we sort of share. It's a collective experience for a lot of folks. And that can be their door to evangelism and to the church. So that has become really in the last year or so, as we've launched that program, a big wide front door for our church and for evangelism is people saying, hey, come to this, you lost someone important to you, come to this grief group, or you're struggling with infertility, me too. Let's have a safe place where we can talk about that and honor one another in that just for 6 weeks, and it's lay led, and people come, and typically then they end up a part of a fuller discipleship or a small group after that that's ongoing, or then they end up coming to worship because typically those groups meet in a church building, one of our church buildings, but not always. But it develops a comfort level of like, okay, these people are real. They're dealing with the same stuff as me. They're not going to judge me. And this Jesus guy is present here too, not just up on that stage or behind that big altar table, right? Or under the robes.
Or in the bread and the
Yeah, or whatever it may
wine.
be. Like, yes, yes, presence there, but not only, right? And I just love it. I love it because it's such a reflection more so of who Jesus is and was early on. Small groups of people going through something, really encountering um, love and embrace and community and miracles even. Um,
Yes, lots of
and
miracles.
then following after. Yeah, and I think that's still something we see today. I think we just don't open our eyes to it.
Absolutely. And so do you feel that evangelism is a priority in the life
Mm,
of the church? And
mm,
we're United Methodist, so United
yep.
Methodist Church, number one. And then number two, how do we get evangelism out of the box of programs? So, what are
Mm,
some tangible things in which listeners can actually jot down and take to heart of how to really be a faith community that understands evangelism but also
yeah,
lives evangelism?
yeah. Those are so important to ask, and thanks for throwing them out there because I think from my perspective, we have two. We have a. I'll just name it. We have a problem in the UMC lining up what we say we prioritize with what we actually prioritize. And so, from my perspective, we would name. I think most Methodists would name evangelism as a priority. It's built right in. We say it is. The clergy say it is. Conferences say it is. Local churches, but in reality, we're not prioritizing it. primarily because I think we're just bad at it. We're out of practice. I think the church largely, and this gets at your second question a bit, the church largely programized and institutionalized evangelism over the last half a century because it was just everything was up and to the right. Church, it was just assumed church. You could start a church and people would come and it would grow, or if you had a big church, it would just continue to be a thing, right? And so evangelism was just, like you said, a program, or was an area of ministry, right? That was someone's job and not everyone's job.
It was supposed to be everyone's job.
Right. Oh yeah, surprise. And so I think, and I really think that sold us short. That sold us short. When I'm speaking about large church context, primarily, I think this is largely truer with larger churches in larger context because you compartmentalize, right? In a smaller church, I think pastors are trying, but they're doing everything. The lay leaders are trying, but they're doing everything. And so it's easier to spend your time spinning your wheels on the things that feel like you're accomplishing something than playing the long game that evangelism tends to be. Because you have to put it out there, and then you have to wait for the Spirit to work, and you don't know how it's going to turn out, and you can't always measure it. But man, I can go in there and do a Bible study with the people I already have, and I can write down how many people showed up, or I can go and if you're if you're a smaller church pastor, I can go fix that toilet and feel like I got something done, but then not, and that's fine, but then not prioritize evangelism. So there's always something that's going to try to take priority over it. But then it's our Achilles heel, because if we don't evangelize, we end up in the trap that we're in right now as a denomination, and we're not the only ones. But in general, it being a denomination that hasn't grown since we started, we have declined since 1968. So in no year since our formation have we grown as a denomination, and I think that's largely a failure of seeing ourselves collectively with the responsibility for evangelism. So I think we want to prioritize it, but we've forgotten how.
And it's not pretty. It's not a pretty thing. It's an uncomfortable thing. Who wants to talk to a stranger? Because we've created not just the church, but as human beings in America, we get our own suburb, we get our own fence, we get our own car, and the sense of community. Now there's some of our siblings in a different area of religiosity that they do it, uber well. They don't, they're unashamedly evangelizing and knocking on doors and standing on street, and I'm not saying you don't have to do that, but it is core value of who we are as Christians. So what are some tangible things, though? Little things that people can do?
Absolutely. So, from my perspective, and I think this is a helpful framework, because you're right, the evangelical church, especially like evangelical non-denominational world, they do this well. I spent time in that world. I grew up United Methodist, but had about 10 years where I was in a different church context, including evangelical non-denominational. And what they do really well is this. It's a priority. It's front and center. What they don't really do well is the back end discipleship after that. It's like, great, now you know Jesus, you're saved, check it off. Good job. That's it. Now we're on to the next, right? And so there tends to be a lack of depth there sometimes in theological formation and discipleship, which has been a focus for the United Methodist Church. So I think, in a tangible way, I think we have to reframe, and we've started to do this at the gathering. We have to first reframe evangelism as a part of discipleship. So instead of compartmentalizing these things as discipleship and evangelism, I think evangelism needs to embed itself within discipleship. So just understanding it as a core practice of our faith. So, what I would say is, what is discipleship? Here we form it around 6 core practices of faith, which is worship, serving in the church and the community, learning together in small groups, prayer, giving of your resources, and really in the last year we were doing it, but we added it as a core value of discipleship, evangelism. So now what it means to embrace discipleship, to live the Christian life, is an embeddedness of evangelism. It's the work not of the church, not of just the pastor, not of that program person. It is the work of the people. So I think reframing that has made a big difference for who we are as a church, understanding it as core to everyone's discipleship. Instead of, because sometimes it can feel like one more thing.
Yes,
And that's why it gets deprioritized, right? It's like discipleship. Okay, we're going to do that. And it's like, well, what about evangelism? And it's like, oh, okay, like I'll get to that. But like discipleship, that's the thing. And when you embed it in, it becomes a part of it. You can't deprioritize it because you're just living it all the time. It's a part of it. Because you're right, it's uncomfortable. You can be weird. People talk about you, but I think in the same way, it's because they're curious. So because people are weird, they'll talk about you because they're curious, but they also feel excluded, right? And when you don't feel it, when you see something that you're curious about but you're not a part of, it turns into like like those people over there. It turns into kind of a negative thing. And so just inviting people in. My invitation within that is on a very practical level. People go, well, how do you do that? And you just say, come and see. That's it. Come and see. It's a simple. We see Jesus do it. We see the apostles do it and disciples do it. Just come and see. I can't tell you everything about. I could tell you my life was changed. And if that sounds compelling to you, come and see. And then I think the key to that is that when and if people do, they have to come and see and experience something that truly is transformational, right? I think the second piece of that puzzle is that whatever's going on, whatever we're inviting people to or supposed to be inviting people to, we don't believe in. We don't invite, and this is a dynamic I see all over, not just the UMC, but a lot of mainline churches, is what we don't have anything compelling to invite people to. Whether it's worship, our programs, like all the alternatives are better. So we don't invite because if we're honest, we're embarrassed. We don't believe in the thing that we're doing. It's great for us, but we don't want to invite our neighbor, to the church basement, with no air conditioning or whatever it may be, right? So we don't, and over time we lose that culture and that practice. But what I'm recognizing, and what's really powerful, is especially in Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they don't care as much about that stuff. They want smaller community. They want community that's real, that's authentic, that's compelling. It's smaller and it moves faster. It's more focused. So yeah, sure, they enjoy the big thing. But what they care more about is authentic, anchored relationships that are not necessarily many, but they are deep and they are real. They want to go deep, quick.
That's right.
And invest in those relationships. And so that's where I think any church size, any church context has an opportunity to invite people into relationships like that that are real, that people are going to encounter in a church context that they're not encountering through YouTubers on the internet. Where everything's fake, So I think that's the new counter narrative, at least I think, for invitation is what we can offer the world is community that's authentic and real and transformative, right? That's a counterculture in the best way. And that's what we can invite people into. That's our new form of evangelism, I think, for this next generation.
Amen. Amen to that. Amen.
Yep.
So last two questions. Number one is, how does AI jive in this world in reimagining evangelism? And then number two, tell us about the upcoming Western North Carolina conference that you and the team are going to be a part of in leading.
Yes, absolutely. AI, that's a great question. I think, like it or not, we ask a lot of questions around AI like it's something that will happen, or it's something we're anticipating coming down the pipeline. But it's here. It's already here. So figuring out, the thing about AI is we're already living with it in our lives and we don't even know it. It's passive. And that's not to say it in a creepy way. It already exists. And so I think first we just have to recognize our lives are saturated by AI 24/7, whether we like it or not. So I think understanding that up front is really important. It's funny. I was flying home from San Francisco earlier this week, and Sam Altman from OpenAI, his mom was sitting behind me on the plane. So I was thinking about AI already. My wife and I were talking about it because he's from St. Louis, and you can approach it with fear, or you can approach it with openness. And I think the right choice with it is somewhere in between for the church, right? Because the reality is, especially with the release of Chat GPT 5.0 coming up, it just gets so much better every time. Like we have such a minimized concept of the exponential nature and growth model of what AI can do. So can you just autopilot everything? Like the stuff you're doing as a pastor, could you autopilot everything? Absolutely. AI can write your sermons for you. In 2 weeks, it'll be able to write sermons for you, and nobody will know the difference. It might be better. It probably will be better than what you write. Honestly,
is it ethical?
Yeah, but is it ethical? Right? Is it ethical? And that's the question. I think that's the question. And so with AI, I think what we constantly have to evaluate is the ethical nature of things, um, both because of the AI itself, and because the soup that we're swimming in culturally doesn't really seem to value ethics that much either, right? So you sort of see it top to bottom. So I think the church as an anchor of ethics, I think that's an opportunity for us to be over time. Again, when we think about what we're inviting people to, because if we're honest, we haven't always been, right? Historically, and especially in recent years, just with the advent of the internet and people being able to share their stories, the church isn't always viewed with trust, right? So how does the church become a counter narrative to what AI can do and what AI is? It's hard when we say, well, we're real. The ethical thing to do is to have the human approach, when what people have seen in a lot of ways has been a lot of harm done by the church over the years. So we have to be careful with that narrative, right? Of, well, we're the alternative to the AI thing, when largely, and whether this is true or not, people see AI as neutral or benign, right? As not having an agenda. It might. It might, but that can. It has to be countered, I think, with the church being sort of the best and highest of the alternative. So from a Wesleyan perspective, I think that's really important, because what we have to offer is holiness, is that holiness tradition, right? AI doesn't have morals, right? It's not being driven. It's being driven by what it's being told to do. It's being driven by the development of its own conscience over time, based upon what it's observing in the world, based upon inputs. And so I think our counter of what it means to live sort of in that holiness tradition, right, and offer something that's alternative, resonates in a different way.
Absolutely.
We have to be an anchor of an alternative. We have to know who we are and be able to tell our story, though, because it can't be about legalism and regulating how people live. That's not the point. That's not the doorway to the church. I think a lot of churches say, whether they name it or not, they approach people in this way. They say, okay, first you have to believe, then you have to act right, and then you can belong. So the order of operations is believe, behave, and belong, right? And that's what creates community. But that's not the church. That's a club. That's like a fraternity.
We're talking about sororities and fraternity.
Right, yeah, that's right. And so, but what we need to understand is that the church has to front load belonging. I think that's the key in all this, as an alternative to what people see out there, whether it's AI or anything else. Is you front load belonging, because AI can do stuff for you. What I love AI for is help me figure out when I can meet with these people.
That's right.
So I don't waste an hour trying to figure out when to meet. And it does it. It figures it out right away, and it's awesome. So that sort of the administrative help stuff is incredible, and so we can embrace that in a lot of ways to minimize the time that we spend doing that work, and then not evangelizing and creating community.
That's right.
But at the core, if I come back to that whole believe, behave, belong thing, we got to flip that on its head. People have to know that they belong right from the jump, right? So you're invited and you belong, right? And out of that, You belong to this group of Christians. Just being in that context or being around us shapes who you are over time. It's like, what's different about Christians? How do I be a Christian? And then you realize over time, oh, this is different and positive, and I like it. And that leads to, well, why are these people different? Oh, it's Jesus. I believe, right? And so, we want to front because it's easier to check that box of like, do you
Mm.
believe? Yes or no? Sweet, you're saved, right? It's a longer
Right.
play to be like, come on in, you belong, you know, figure out what this thing is,
Yeah.
and then believe. But that was what Jesus did with the disciples. It's like, come on, you're part of this crew. And they didn't understand any of it. And they asked a lot of dumb questions, you know.
Just
And
like us,
Jesus,
right? Just
yeah,
like
just
us.
like us, just like us. And because they were just like us, just
They're just
people.
like us, just people.
And then at the end, it took Jesus dying and rising from the dead. It took, Thomas putting his finger in Jesus' side,
Right.
for them to go, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
And then we put it back on people now who don't get to poke Jesus in the side necessarily and go like, why don't you get this right away? Why can't I just tell you the good news? And you're like, I'm in. While
Amen.
that works sometimes, most of the time it doesn't. And people need a process. They need to know they belong with a group of folks that care about them and love them, that are safe, that are accepting and welcoming, but that are a little bit different in a compelling way, which leads people to really understanding and then belief in who Jesus
Amen.
is.
Amen. Oh man, this is good stuff. We're going to have another conversation on AI because I'm facilitating and leading, and we have a workshop that's coming up in September
Awesome.
because it's repackaging what we have, and I believe it's an evangelistic tool that can be utilized
Oh, yeah.
based on substance. So I want to definitely end on highlighting the event that's going to happen in
Oh,
West
that's right.
Carolina.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So, for years we've done Beyond as an annual conference-based event here in St. Louis, hosted by the Gathering. And for the first time, we're hosting a regional event in Charlotte, North Carolina, coming up this October on the 3rd and 4th. It's a Friday, Saturday, and it's going to be at University City United Methodist Church there in Charlotte. They're hosting the event, and they're awesome hosts. So similar, it's almost identical in many ways event to what we do in St. Louis. Similar speaker slate, where we're centering what does it mean to be at churches that are focused on invitation and growth, essentially our framework for evangelism, while also being radically inclusive in that work. Rather than front loading with a litmus test. And what radically inclusive can mean varies based upon your context. In our case, a lot of times that centers LGBT inclusion, but it also means racial inclusion.
Mhm.
And that's front and center in some other contexts too, even more so.
Mhm.
So I don't want to limit people's understanding of what that means. We're going to focus there a bit at this conference in Charlotte. The speaker slate is awesome. It includes our lead pastor, but also church leaders from around the country who are doing similar work in really different contexts in the Episcopal Church, in the Black Church, in evangelical world, in the mainline world. So it really is a broad perspective on what that looks like. And I think it's going to be really important. But similar, it's a tangible physical expression of what I talked about earlier with Beyond, of getting people in the same room
Mhm.
who are after the same thing and don't realize each other exist. So
That's
you
right.
can look across the room and go, oh, like there's somebody I could connect with for the long term that may live across the country or may live an hour from you or just down the street. So that's our hope. The idea with the East Coast Regional is to make it more accessible to people who can't necessarily fly to St. Louis for a couple days in February. And so we centered it in Charlotte in partnership with the Western North Carolina Annual Conference, and they're awesome partners, so that it was kind of in driving range for a lot of those people. That was the idea. And we made it on a Friday, Saturday instead of a Monday, Tuesday, which we
Right.
normally do, to make it more accessible to lay folks. So that's our hope, that it can be accessible within a day's drive to people in that region of the country, and that lay people will come check it out, because as we have to recognize, more and more churches are led by lay folks than ever. And we
Absolutely.
have to acknowledge and equip them for that work.
The greatest movement of Wesleyanism is lay-led movement, and
That's right.
the kingdom of God is definitely a lay-led movement. And at the end of the day,
Oh, yeah.
we're all lay, just with a title.
That's right.
So, well,
That's
thank
right.
you so much for hanging out with me today. I'm just excited, number one, that you're on my board, and then number two,
Yeah.
that we're doing collaborative work together. And so I hope that the listeners take all the things that we chatted about today and will dig deeper and desire more in how they can also reimagine their evangelistic spirit in the life of their church, because at the end of the
Yes.
day, you can't have evangelism unless you have discipleship, and if you have discipleship, you can't negate evangelism, because they are
Absolutely.
twins for the kingdom of God. And so
That's right.
thanks again for being with us today, and we will hear more from my good friend, the Reverend Ryan. Say your last name again.
Hebel.
Hebel. I was going to say it, but I didn't want to mess
Nailed
up.
it.
Yes, Hebel.
It's been good to be with you. Thanks so much for the invite.
Absolutely. Talk to you.
Bye.